Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please hit that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amount given in the link in the description box. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest tonight, Dr. Vijay Prasad. Dr. Vijay Prasad is a historian and an author of several books. Vijay, welcome back to India and Global Left.
It's great to be with you. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to discuss, of course, the war between United States and Israel on one hand and Iran on the other. Maybe if you could start by sharing your comments on the 28 days of war so far and the broader significance of the war.
Well, I mean, if you look at it from a standpoint of where we are after 3 weeks, it looks like the United States and Israel are a little bit stuck because they started out with, this theory of rapid domination, where you come in, you try to decapitate a leader, you destroy infrastructure, you terrorize the country, and then eventually, the country will sue for peace. The recent test case for this was Venezuela. Decapitate the leadership, you threaten to destroy the country, you demonstrate your power, and then, the country surrenders. Well, the thing is that the Iranians have prepared for decades for just this scenario. It's not like they haven't experienced major strikes before. Just last year, 12-day war in July of 2025, United States and Israel pummeled Iran's nuclear research facilities, its nuclear energy sites, and so on. So it's not like they haven't had experience. And it's not like they haven't had experience with assassinations. They faced assassinations of nuclear scientists, of senior leaders. Qasem Soleimani was killed in Baghdad in another attack, and so on. So it's not like they have not withstood attacks and so on. So they've prepared. And what they've prepared, I'm told, is several levels, maybe up to 8 levels of leadership. So decapitation strike doesn't work. You can kill a whole bunch of leaders. They'll still have leaders because they've built institutions. I think that's something that is not being understood. That their leaders are, in a sense, not completely unexpendable. They can, when they lose somebody, they can fill the seat again. So that's important. It's 100 million population. It's an educated public. They can take care of a decapitation strike. When it comes to civilian casualties, again, they've prepared. The population has been made aware of this. They fought a terrible war for 8 years with Iraq, where there were large numbers of civilian casualties. So they are prepared to withstand this. And they've also built an escalation ladder. They understand, military conflict. So initially they fired missiles that were pretty ordinary. Then they fired their missiles which had cluster warheads. They are keeping in reserve their 2,000 or so small boats that are in inlets and undersea caverns. And, they haven't yet given, as it were, the order for different militia groups across the region, particularly in Iraq, to strike US targets. So the Iranians have the capacity to escalate. United States and Israel they've fired their gun. What do you do next? Go nuclear? I mean, how do you escalate if you're the United States? Do you kill more civilians? That would be terrible for world opinion. So in that sense, it's understandable that Donald Trump is asking for a ceasefire because the United States doesn't have any options left. The Iranians are not interested. They want much more than a ceasefire. They want a real peace deal, which includes Lebanon and Iraq. I don't think the United States and the Israelis are going to do that. And so this is not 28 days. This is the beginning of a very long period.
I wanted to quickly ask you about your thoughts on the balance of power. I mean, I know you are not a military expert, but you're a historian, and I think about Mark Bloch's caution on his book A Historian's Craft about sources. And while he was writing about why historians should be skeptical about sources, he was talking about war because he lived through the Second World War. And one of the things he said was that do not believe the press, particularly during a war, because almost everything coming out is lie. So I wanted to ask you, or put across your perspective about how you look at the balance of power, given the mainstream media is caricaturing a picture as if Iran is at the verge of collapsing. It hasn't happened, of course, and they are exposed. And there is the Iranian side, Press TV, and others are citing reports by Russi, which says that the United States is running out of ammunition, interceptor systems, radar systems, etc., and they are very, very costly, expensive. And given the deindustrialization of the United States, it is very, very difficult to sustain a long-term war, given now industrial capacity and the ability to secure supply chain determines the outcome of war. What are your thoughts about the balance of power in this war?
I mean, obviously one has to always be cautious because it's difficult to say. But yeah, let's go back historically. From the war in Korea onward, the United States has always said that it's triumphed, but in fact hasn't. I mean, it had to accept the fact that Korea is partition. They didn't prevail over the northern part of Korea. Vietnam, the United States was defeated. In Afghanistan, they had to withdraw several times, not able to prevail. When it comes to Iraq, I mean, I was in Iraq just after the United States entered there, and initially it just looked like a bloodbath. The United States enters, there was no sign of of any possibility of the Iraqis being able to push back. The military seemed to have dissolved and so on. But by 2004, Muqtada al-Sadr, and who was then a very young man, emerged as guerrilla leaders. And the section near Ramadi, Fallujah, Tikrit, Saddam Hussein's hometown, suddenly rose up in a big rebellion. And the military that had disappeared took their uniforms off and came back fighting as with guerrilla tactics and pinned the US down. US had to eventually leave the country. So victory and defeat militarily doesn't come only from your military strength, your hardware. Although I will accept that there are signs that the US is having a hard time rearming itself. But let's put the hardware aside. Wars are won through politics, not through brute force alone. I mean, yeah, it's true, you can kill everybody, but you can't necessarily subdue them. And it's subjugation that is really the end game in a war. And the US is not going to be able to subdue 100 million Iranians. I mean, this is not 22 million Iraqis, which the US had a hard time with anyway. It's 100 million Iranians. And the Israelis are also miscalculating because there are 7 million people in Israel, roughly 7 million people. I mean, what are you talking about? Even with the most sophisticated hardware, how are you going to fight a land war? You're going to send Israeli soldiers into Iran? You crazy? The United States is mobilizing Marines and so on to come near Iran. There are 160 to 200,000 people just in the IRGC, in the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps. Just in the IRGC, there are about 200,000 people. That's separate from the Iranian military. You have enormous military infrastructure there that isn't just going to go to sleep. So I don't know what the planning was from the United States. I mean, if I said the Iranians have been planning for decades, I hope the US has been planning. I mean, what have they been doing? Sleeping on their side, wondering, thinking that these barbarians will get afraid when we light a firecracker in the sky? No, the Iranians don't seem to care. They are ready to defend their sovereignty.
One of the things said about the strength or the response of Iran is the horizontal escalation, its attacks on the US bases in the Gulf region. I wanted to tie that up with a conversation or a question on the significance of this war on US imperialism in this region, given in my assessment, this is the first time that the Gulf countries have had to rethink about about the agreements that they made maybe 50 years ago, since the 1973 oil crisis, which was basically buying security by striking an alliance with the United States. And throughout these decades, we have seen neighboring countries from Iraq to Syria falling apart because of Western intervention, civil war, internal tensions, etc. But these Gulf countries that struck an alliance with the US remained apparently at least stable, and that allowed them to invite finance capital, tourism, etc., etc. It is probably the first time they have had to rethink about this, given they have realized that this has made them vulnerable to attacks from Iran. And on the face of attacks from Iran, they are not able to defend themselves the way they did, let's say, against non-state actors like Al-Qaeda or ISIS that happened in Iraq and in Syria. How do you look at the significance of all this to the existence or the long-term existence of US imperialism in this region?
I mean, it's a fair question. I mean, the Gulf Arab states didn't see themselves in history. There was a time when Beirut used to have this role of being the banker of the Middle East, and it was the place where people went and bought property along the Corniche, and there were very large, beautiful buildings, just as they are now in Dubai and so on. For that period, the skyscrapers. There's no Burj Dubai in Beirut, but there are buildings for that period. And then the civil war came in 1975, and Beirut ceased to be that hub. The civil war in Beirut comes around the same time as the oil boom. And so the role of Beirut was then moved to Dubai and to eventually Doha, but first Dubai and so on. Well, you know, these things have a half life. Yeah, you've had a good run from 1975 to 2025. That's 50 years of a very good run, and now having decided to throw yourselves into the arms of the United States and into a kind of U.S. security alliance, it was always going to be the case that as the Iranians have shown, the base is less a protection and more, it makes you a target. And that was always going to be the case. I think it was a matter of time. In Doha, for instance, the Qataris have actually decent relations with the Iranians. I remember talking to senior Qatari officials who mentioned how Qatar was eager to build a undersea freshwater pipeline to get fresh water from Iran into Qatar. This was, sometime before desalination plants became, viable economically, and so they had decent relations. But because of their allegiance to the U.S. base, those relations frayed for good reason. I mean, when Saudi Arabia and Qatar had its own tussle, it was easy for the Qataris to open up a dialogue with Iran at the time. So it's not like these countries have some permanent animosity. There's an opening there, political, social, economic opening, but the military bases actually put pressure against that relationship. And I don't know what's going to happen. Will the United Arab Emirates say that let's double down, as they say, on this strategy with the United States, and let's increase our military spending and so on? I mean, look, there is in no conceivable reality can the UAE go to war against Iran. In no conceivable reality. I mean, the UAE is in a very bloody conflict in Sudan. Yeah, it's backing the one of the most vicious forces in Sudan for the benefits of gold and so on. It's a ghastly episode in the UAE's history. But I don't think the UAE is stupid enough to get into a direct conflict with Iran. I mean, Iran, has just to send two or three missiles into the UAE, particularly into the Emirate of Dubai, and it can crush the UAE politically. It can create an enormous set of chaos there. The same in Qatar. I mean, it's just inconceivable that they would go in that direction. So they are going to have to look for an alternative security paradigm. The GCC is not functioning. Yeah, I mean, what has the GCC done? The Gulf Coordination Council. What has it done in response to this? Nothing. What has Saudi Arabia as the largest country done? Nothing really. They're sitting it out. They are also terrified of the knock-on effect. I mean, Bahrain, if Ali Sistani, who's the number one marja, the Iraqi leader, is the number one marja taqlid of Shiism, if he blows the whistle and says, got to defend Iran, there's a revolution in Bahrain tomorrow, which is unstoppable. Yeah, I mean, so majority Shia population with a Sunni monarch, it's curtains. It almost was curtains during the Arab Spring. And then the Saudis invaded Bahrain to put the uprising down. Yeah, the Saudis had to invade, and the Saudi military has been sitting on its hands.
They have been trying to unfold or pack from the civil war that they fought indirectly in Yemen. I mean, that's what many experts on Yemen are saying. I wanted to quickly ask you about Iraq, given how tense or how unstable or how much is the destabilizing effect in Iraq on this war? We have reports this morning about the U.S. airstrike in Habania base in Iraq, killing 5 soldiers, and Iraq has been recovering from decades of resistance and internal stripes. How much of there are also reports about Iraqi oil export dropping by 70% because of the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, and the U.S. has had very complicated relationships with different factions in Iraq. How do you see this panning out, the impact of this war in Iraq?
You see, it's really interesting. In the last few days, not just immediately, but last few days, United States has been striking various military bases where they claim the popular mobilization forces are based. These are, typically thought to be pro-Iranian. And, they've been hitting them. They hit a medical clinic a few days ago and so on. I mean, I would say these are largely unprovoked thus far. These are preemptive hits because, as I said, these groups have not yet started to strike US bases. They are waiting. This is the escalation ladder. When the whistle is blown and these groups move, the US bases are extremely vulnerable, not just in Anbar province where this strike took place, but they are vulnerable in the north, in Erbil and places like that. There's already been some sort of mysterious fire in Erbil that I don't exactly know what happened. I don't think anybody knows what happened. But the point is, the US is conducting preemptive strikes on these bases because they know that the escalation, is very, very dangerous for them. Yeah, and it's not just in Iraq. Iraq is the epicenter. When Iraq moves, it's going to be a big problem for the United States. Yeah, Iraq is the epicenter. But, you can't underestimate the fact that there are all kinds of groups sitting in Syria waiting to move. These groups have been there. They are hardened. They've been fighting in Kalamun. I've seen them. Some of them trained in Iraq. Yeah, they came to Iraq to train, and then they came across in Syria. These were groups that were defending the Assad government, and then after the collapse of the Assad government, they went to sleep. They are sleeper groups. I don't know when they will move. We don't know. Ansar Allah, or the so-called Houthis in Yemen, have been pretty silent. Somehow the word has got around to these groups. Wait, don't, you wait. You don't have to fire now. This is not that. We are waiting for something. And I find the silence pretty chilling, if you see what I mean. If you're sitting in a US base, yeah, and you're surrounded and nobody's firing at you, you're going to have to, you can't sleep at night because they can come at you at any point. And they're waiting for a whistle to blow. And this is the reason why, despite the killing of Qasim Soleimani, despite the real erosion of power of Hezbollah, despite the overthrow of the government in Syria and so on, it doesn't mean that this, so-called resistance circuits have been completely vanquished. They exist. You don't need that many people, to create chaos. Yeah, rocket launchers here and there fired into bases. United States cannot tolerate enormous amounts of casualties. It's a fact. Iran can take some casualties because they are fighting for their lives. Yeah, they are fighting to defend their homeland. What is some kid from Iowa? He's not defending his Iowa, He's out there sitting in Iraq wondering, what am I doing in Erbil? Yeah, send me home. The morale is not going to be as high as the Iranian morale. That is another part of the calculation.
Particularly in this war, the opinion polls within the United States are showing very, very negative numbers. I mean, this is probably one of those rare wars that has been unpopular right from the beginning. I mean, usually the Americans start to think negatively about the war once that starts hurting them, but this is going the other way around. Even in a Fox News poll, I think it was yesterday or the day before, roughly two-thirds of Fox News viewers say that this war has been conducted in a terrible way. I wanted to bring up Israel because that is a giant outpost of the US empire in the region. And no matter how much we talk about the dilemma of the GCC countries, no matter how much we talk about the conditions in Iraq and in Syria, the main epicenter of all this is Israel. And it's very hard to know exactly about what's going on given the censorship in Israel about the impact of this war. Before the war, of course, last year in June, we knew later on that the war with Iran was very destabilizing for them internally, for economically, politically. What is your sense of what is going on within Israel as an impact of this, given they have also opened up front in Lebanon and now we are seeing a ground invasion of South Lebanon and casualties of Israeli soldiers out there? What is your sense of the impact of all this in Israel?
Yeah, so I mean, this is very interesting because just about a day ago, Israeli military chief, was making a public statement. I mean, it's unusual to have a military chief out there talking about how the military is not really able to deal with three fronts. General Zamir said, look, if you're continuing to try to hold the line in Gaza, then you're in a full scale war in Lebanon. And then there's this war with Iran. Again, no clue what could happen if Syria, militias in Syria start to fire at the Israeli posts and so on. So military chief, General Zamir Eyal Zamir said that, well, we have a problem. Well, then right after that, interestingly, the opposition leader Lapid, Yair Lapid, said that, the military is, as he said, stretched to the limit and beyond. I thought that was an interesting line, stretched to the limit and beyond. I mean, we haven't heard from Netanyahu with his normal bravado in a while. I mean, initially there was a long period people thought he's been killed. Well, whether he's been killed or not is irrelevant. The Netanyahu of bravado is dead. You don't see him strutting the stage, doing daily press conferences, talking about how well the war is going. Yeah, he's been absent. Yeah, front page is the opposition leader, not Benjamin Netanyahu. It's Yair Lapid who's saying we're not winning the situation. Yeah, I'm not talking about the war. I'm talking about the whole situation. He basically saying we're stretched to the limit. We can't win this whole situation. Yeah, Palestine, Lebanon, and Iran now. And I'm adding to that. Wait, Yemen is silent. Iraq is silent. Syria is silent. So Yair Lapid says, following the military chief, we are in problem. Where is Netanyahu? His silence, the bravado put to mute, demonstrates that the Israelis, I think, even this section of the Israelis, have recognized this has been a miscalculation. It's a serious miscalculation. They are losing the war to Iran. I don't think this is something that they anticipated. Yeah, they thought decapitation strike, this, that, they'll plop the crown prince on Tehran and all's well. They miscalculated the protests of December last year. They thought the protests were against the government. In fact, they were against the government, but they were against government policies. They were against inflation. People are angry about inflation. They were against the financial policies. But were they saying, let's tear up the constitution of Iran and bring the Shah back and have an Israeli, embassy inside the presidential palace? Is that what the people? No. The Israelis, the United States, they exaggerated what was going on in December. The Iranian diaspora outside the country and their bots. You see, this is the problem. When you start taking instructions from your own bots, from your own troll farms, when you start believing your own propaganda, you run up against reality. And they've run up against reality. You asked a good question. What about Israel? Well, let me ask you, where has Netanyahu been?
I wanted to broaden out this conversation a little bit and place it within the discussion of global South and its relationship to the West. Given there have always been divisions within the global South vis-a-vis its attitude to the West. A segment of the global South, mostly right-wing, and that becomes more prominent when wherever there are right-wing governments. India is a case in point. They have been pro-West or at least ambivalent when it comes to things that are clear-cut. For instance, the Indian government never condemned the genocide that happened in Gaza. Its record so far within this war has been very, very shameful. And we can think about other countries. Given this has come after the tariff war that was imposed on much of the global South, whose economy had to take a huge toll of those haphazard tariffs and unjustified tariffs from small to big countries in the global South, and also the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro, the Venezuelan president. Ideally, the global South countries should see, if not they haven't seen it so far, the naked face of US imperialism, and they should move closer and closer to BRICS and other non-Western alternatives. What is your sense of how the global South is responding to this, given the tremendous economic impact of all this? I mean, as I am in India, I've seen the impact of this on the energy sector. I mean, you don't get LPG cylinders in my province of Assam. Now the commercial cylinders are off, and I know this because I started out a bakery, small bakery recently. There are huge queues in petrol pumps. You don't get diesel, you don't get petrol. But the government is silent, and that there are enormous outreach, I would say, from the Iranian side about what India can do, it can negotiate, and so on and so forth. So my larger question to you is, how does these developments, the recent development, including this war, how does it affect the future of the global South insofar as West attitude to Western imperialism is concerned?
I mean, look, frankly, the point on the table should be, what is necessary for your people. Any foreign policy should start there, and India has actually done a really bad job on this. I'm very disappointed with the foreign minister or the external affairs minister, Mr. Jaishankar. I mean, he occasionally makes very good statements. For instance, on your program, I've talked about his statement where he said, we don't follow the NATO mindset. Well, it would be interesting in all this period, these 20 years of the Modi government, it would be interesting to have had one text that tried to have a coherent theory of Indian foreign policy. There is not, I've looked for it, there is no text, single, like a white paper on Indian foreign policy. Okay, you say, we are rejecting Nehruvian naivete. Okay, let's set aside Nehruvian naivete. So what's Modi's realism? Where's the text on this? Why does India engage with the BRICS? Iran is a BRICS country. Yeah, it's a full paid member of the BRICS country. Iran is a major supplier of oil. 100 million people. Yeah, it has enormous cultural links with India. Israel has no oil. Israel has no oil to provide for India. Yeah, there is no tangible benefit from Israel to India. If you talk about hundreds of millions of Indians, they get a greater tangible benefit from a stable, low price of oil and gas from the Gulf Arab states than from Israel. A tangible benefit. Yeah. I mean, where is the text, man? I don't know. I haven't seen it. The Chinese have put out texts. Even the Russians have a text out on their vision of the world. I don't see it from India. And this is what India used to do. And I would like to see it. I don't know, even if friendly to the government intellectuals have written this text, which is a theory of Indian foreign policy in the Modi era. Where is it? Is it entirely driven by pragmatism? Was India's refusal to stop buying Russian energy pragmatic? I think it was pragmatic. But I also think it was a little beyond pragmatic. It was also thinking in terms of India's relationship with Russia. But what's the theory of that? Is it an Asianist theory? Is it merely nostalgia for a past, when we had a very close relationship with the Soviet Union? What is it? I don't get it. So you asked about the global South, but then you drilled into India. And so the temptation is to stay with India. But if we go out to the global South, I think right now, the bulk of the world's people understand quite clearly, including people in the United States, as you said, that this is a war of aggression, an absolutely unnecessary war imposed by the US and Iran and Israel on Iran. Absolutely unprovoked war. And this war has had enormous economic impact and will have for a long while on the world's population. Yesterday, Larry Fink of BlackRock said something banal, but I think I want to repeat it. It's totally banal. He said a year from now, by the way, oil prices are around $105 for a barrel of Brent crude, just for reference, somewhere around there, 105. So Larry Fink says next year, year from now, calendar year from now, oil prices will either be $40 a barrel or they will be $150 a barrel. He said they cannot be anywhere in between. They will either be $40 or $150. I thought that's interesting. That's quite a spread from Mr. Larry Fink. But what he's saying is either in a year, there will be the complete subordination of Iran, that's $40 a barrel, or the United States will accept that Iran is a major power in the world and decide to back off $40 a barrel. Those are two options for $40 a barrel. Or the United States and Israel will have to continue to grind on this war, and Iran will refuse to stop, and oil prices will be at 150. Why 150? 200. But definitely not under one. Those are the two choices, or rather, three choices. One choice is that Iran capitulates and collapses, and the Shah comes back, and this, that, and the other. It's totally inconceivable scenario. The second is the United States has to accept Iran as a country with the Islamic Republic as the government and so on. Accept that that's a reality, yeah, and then you can have a peace agreement. Or the third is it goes on for a whole year. Very possible. Listen, did you imagine that the war in Ukraine would be on in 2026? I don't think so. I don't think you imagined it would grind on. That just a few days ago, the Russians would swarm Kiev in the middle of the afternoon with 100+ drones. I didn't certainly imagine it would go on this long, 4 years. Yeah, on and on and on.
There is, with regards to oil energy prices, there is also a path that people are not talking about, and that is within the context of how this war has been, rightly or for right or wrong reason, has benefited China and Russia in different ways. And one of the things told about the energy sector is that if the global South countries, or for that matter, Europe, if the leaders are intelligent enough to understand the vulnerabilities of relying on fossil fuel because of how much these transit corridors are within the choke points that are vulnerable to wars. And we are living in an age of war now within this phase of late imperialism, or late, let's say, US imperialism. There might be search for cheap, effective Chinese green energy technology. And that might lead to very rapid acceleration of diffusion of these technologies. Initially, the Chinese would gain a lot, but eventually there would be more domestic production in other countries of this. And that might be one path out of this mess of being stuck within fossil fuel economy. Your response?
I mean, yes, it's already happening. I mean, Cuba, for instance, is facing an oil embargo, brutal oil embargo that the U.S. has placed upon it, and it's having to accelerate to solar panels, trying to get a hold of batteries and so on. But this is a situation elsewhere. You know, all countries are going to move. I mean, it's more likely that this war will accelerate us to renewable energy than any climate summit, than any climate summit. And certainly than a COP, which have become pretty useless. Yeah. The IPCC reports are not as important as the fact that oil prices are doubling in many countries. Yeah, that is definitely. I mean, you started a bakery. Congratulations. You should put solar panels on the roof, and maybe you go back to what my grandfather had built in Dehradun, which was a gobar gas plant 100 years ago. Yeah, he had a couple of buffaloes, and the buffaloes, gobar, the refuse, was what powered this churner, and all the electricity on his farm was from the gobar gas plant. He was off the grid 100 years ago. And so yeah, there are lots of options. Now, I will admit, gobar gas plant, you can't run a computer on it. You're just not going to get enough power to run, I don't know, a washing machine. So you do need something more than that, and you need good batteries. Why isn't India producing high quality solar panels and batteries. Stunning.
Yeah, part of the reason is all this embargo on trade with China. Now we are seeing a relaxation, but we have been through 2 to 3 years of that madness, and there has always been complaints from the business class. I mean, part of the reason of India-China normalization was that the business class was constantly complaining against these trade embargoes, and that was one of the very prime reason why that normalization happened. I mean, there was the tariff and how the U.S. Quote unquote betrayed the sentiments of the Indians and so on and so forth. But yeah, thanks. I might also manage to get some subsidies on the Gobar gas plant if I could repackage it as the holy cow and all those things. But jokes aside,
Absolutely. Well played. Well
yeah,
played.
yeah. Jokes aside, I wanted to end this by asking you a final question on Cuba, given when I was coordinating about this interview, I was told you have you been to Cuba or you were attending some seminars on Cuba. My feeling has been, and I hope I would be wrong, is that Venezuela, Iran, and then Cuba. And my heart breaks when I say this, but that's what is the reading on the wall as far as I see the likes of Rubio and others moving in these geopolitical chess games, as the many administrators within the U.S. would like to call it. How likely is another war another war or regime change, quote unquote regime change operation in Cuba?
I mean, you know, the United States has tried to overthrow the Cuban Revolution since 1959. So it's not like they would be starting from scratch. They are trying to squeeze it. People are trying to break through that embargo. Trump has directly said first Iran, then Cuba. The problem is he's going to be trapped in Iran, and that's an issue. Yeah, I don't think the Iran conflict is going to end either quickly or easily. And I don't think there's an appetite for a quick invasion of Cuba. I think there's really no appetite for this, in the country. I was in Havana about 10, 12 days ago. It's a tough situation. There are blackouts and so on. It's not an easy situation, but they are going to fight it out, man. They don't want to return to being a gangster's paradise. Yeah, it's a sovereign country. Yeah, and I agree with the Hindu. The Hindu ran a very good editorial, basically saying, where's India? Where are these countries? Why aren't they standing up and saying this is ludicrous? It violates international law, violates Article 2 and Article 17 of the UN Charter. Sometimes I think I'm the only one who has memorized the UN Charter.
Maybe Norman Finkelstein. I'm not sure. We'll leave it there, Vijay. This was a fascinating conversation, and thank you so much for your time and appreciate the answers you gave.
Thanks a lot.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.